Folks, you're all very welcome to this webinar organised by Changing Markets and moderated by me, Laura Sullivan from the Flamingo Collective. We're delighted you came along, and here by means of a short introduction, I thought we'd start with the existential question of why are we here, or at least why are we here for this event? So the climate emergency is escalating with alarming impacts for the food system. Meanwhile, the link between the food system, particularly meat and dairy, and climate change is recognised. But big agribusiness narratives and lobbying tactics are muddying the waters. Belém and COP30 was the latest sort of global scene of some pretty shameful narrative manipulation by agribusiness to justify continued growth of animal agriculture. But it's not the only place that this is happening, and Changing Markets has been working on this for quite some years now. We've seen that the result of this has been that green policies, just to mention one, the EU Farm to Fork strategy, which is mentioned in this report, have been significantly weakened. Now, Changing Markets are calling out this stuff. They've just launched a new report called Dangerous Distractions, How Agribusiness Narratives Undermine Climate Action. And if you haven't read the report, don't worry, there's no test. But what I can say is that in a nutshell, Changing Markets say that without action to transform food systems, the net zero targets and the goals of the Paris Agreement will be missed. And one thing holding back that kind of food system transformation, even the very idea of the need for it, is a whole lot of distraction tactics, which are detailed in this report. And so the reality of meat and dairy contributions to climate change and the need to address diets and consumption are also not reflected in countries' NDCs or nationally determined contributions, which are at the heart of the Paris Agreement. Meanwhile, I think something that's probably going to come up here is that agriculture and especially dietary shift are not even getting much of the climate headlines and are rare in key climate discussions. As a non-expert on this topic, what I find very odd is really what the report begins with, which is that animal agriculture needs a stable climate system, but that same animal agriculture is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. That feels like an own goal. And meanwhile, 80% of people globally support more action on climate change. Those citizens are also consumers. Doesn't feel like a very good look for agribusiness to be undermining the very climate action that consumers and citizens are calling for. Against this, you will note in the report, once you get to it, or you may have already seen, that there is also some good news. The case has been made, the scientific consensus is there, stating that dietary shifts and reduction in agricultural methane are key to staying on the 1.5 or even 2 degree trajectory. But also the alternative is possible. And the 2025 Eat Lancet report shows how healthy, sustainable diets on a planet of 10 billion are possible and would cut emissions in half and prevent a whopping 15 million premature deaths every single year. So let's jump into it. In the next hour or so, about an hour and 15 minutes, we're going to first learn a bit more about this report from Nusa Urbancic, who is the CEO of Changing Markets. We will then hear from Zach Boren, who is a freelance investigative reporter who's doing a lot of work around big ag's lobbying tactics and influence. We'll also hear from Charlotte Scaddan, who is senior advisor on information integrity at the UN. She's going to take us into the area of disinformation, misinformation around climate. And Thais Lazzeri, who is the director and founder of FALA Impact Studio, on food-related disinformation, really at the multilateral level with the Brazilian context. And the way we're going to run this is as follows. So each speaker needs a bit of time to tell the story and put it together. And so they'll get about 8 to 10 minutes. We'll take a little breather after each talk. So that 1 minute for each, that break is our resistance to the constant acceleration of everything all the time on this planet. And it's also a chance for you to stop and just check and see, right, do I have a question already in mind? Do I have an observation? And if you do, you could please already put them in the Q&A box there. So we'll take time for the questions at the end. Just 2 practical things, and then I'm going to hand over to Nusa. One is just in the name of transparency, we should tell you that we had 163, or Changing Markets had 163 people registering for this event from all kinds of different backgrounds, journalists, funders, public affairs people, researchers, people from the UN, lots of people from NGOs, and so on. We will inevitably, in an event like this, not be able to hear everything everyone wants to say, but we'll really encourage you to bring those ideas and questions through the Q&A box. And when you do that, do us a favour, just add your name and what you're up to on this planet. And note that you can direct your questions to a specific speaker, or it can go to the group, though we may not have time for everyone to answer everything. The other last sort of practical or sort of clarification is that, again, as I said, climate misinformation and disinformation will come up. Just to define those carefully to begin with, when we are referring to misinformation, we're really talking about the unintentional spread of this information. And then climate disinformation, we've taken the European Commission's definition, which is the intentional spread of false or misleading information about climate change and climate action, which can take many forms, from denial and conspiracy theories to softer, more insidious arguments that seek to muddy the waters. So I'm seeing some things coming up in the chat, which I'll address now in a moment. But without further ado, Nusa, I'd love to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I have some slides, if it's possible to bring them in. And just to say, for those of us who don't know us, Changing Markets Foundation is a Netherlands registered campaigning organization, and we do a lot of campaigns that expose corporate accountability. And around 3 years ago, we came across this issue of climate misinformation in food systems, and yeah, since then we've been working on this, and yeah, still waiting for the slides. And this report, Dangerous Distractions, is actually one of the latest one in the series that you can see on our website. We have a separate climate misinformation section on our website. And I'm presenting this, but it's the whole team of Changing Market that's behind me, especially Maddie and Caitlin and several researchers that were also involved in this work. So next slide, please. I just want to start with putting things a little bit in the context, because I would say that, yeah, the issue that Laura already touched, we have media underreporting the problem. It's only 3% of stories, of climate stories, actually cover the impact of animal agriculture. Social media is also ripe with misinformation, conspiracy theories, and polarized debates. And I will show you some of those posts later on the next slide. And then behind all of this, we have powerful lobby groups that often instrumentalize farmers to fend off any action to address their environmental impacts, especially any kind of policies that are proposed. And they also widely use greenwashing to present themselves part of the solution. And this report, Dangerous Distractions, will actually talk a lot about those tactics and those narratives. And this is kind of why policymakers see this food system or climate action in food as a toxic topic that would both infringe with personal food choices, but also kind of anger farmers, which they see as one of the key constituencies. Next slide. Our first report was actually kind of going into this social media. We kind of started this by commissioning social media listening of what's happening around food and diets online. And we were quite shocked because we saw that there's a lot of misinformation out there. We discovered 1 million tweets, and a lot of them were like the top left post, which is conspiracy theories. So looking at the global elites that are trying to make us eat fake meat that is causing disease, or insects. Then a lot of posts, the second biggest category was attacking alternatives, so either vegan products or vegan diets. So you see the two on the bottom left, which is kind of going against plant-based milks. And then another big one was also around meat and masculinity, which you can see at the top right corner, which is basically if you don't eat steak or you drink soy milk or you're a vegan, you're not a real man. And then in the middle, it's kind of inflating some kind of environmental benefits of meat, of growing cows specifically. So this is regenerative farming with cows is actually going to solve the climate crisis. There's a lot of this stuff happening online also. And then at the bottom right, it's also kind of important to take into perspective how media plays into this misinformation. So this is the Daily Mail piece on a preprint study by UC Davis that has not been peer reviewed. And the study looked at how lab grown meat or cultured meat is actually much worse for the climate than beef. And this is the spin that Daily Mail had on it. Like burger lovers rejoice, lab grown meat is 25 times worse for the climate than beef. So this is the kind of stuff that exists in this field. And to come to the next slide, please. And this is kind of, the background to our research and our latest report that we did. And this latest report looked at the key narratives that evolved around COP30. This is the climate conference that took place last November in Belém in Brazil. And it shows how the meat industry tried to present itself as part of climate solution, telling positive story. I'll bring some quotes in later. A lot of it was also based around these narratives that they have that meat is natural, that it's essential part of the healthy diet, that consumption is anyway going up and they're just doing their best to meet the demand. And the industry has this perception now that it is winning on the health narrative, especially with this protein trends that are now also very alive in on social media, and also with the fact that that the U.S. Health Secretary is kind of a proponent of keto diet, and the recent U.S. dietary health guidelines now put meat much more into kind of you need to eat more of animal protein as opposed to like you should be cutting down and prioritizing plant-based protein, which is also a case study that we have in our report. And finally, what we also saw, it's not just about the narratives and the media and the social media. The industry is also flooding climate events with lobbyists. The smoke investigation showed there were 300 lobbyists, which is more than the delegation of Canada with 220 that kind of went to COP30. Then they also discovered almost 200 partnerships with influencers. And that is all agribusinesses, but the largest part was actually meat and dairy industry. So so that part. And it was basically doctors, movie stars, models, farmers, all kinds of influencers were paid to promote the messages of the industry. And then companies also had partnerships with key media outlets like JBS, the biggest meat industry in the world that has so many corruption scandals from environment to workers' abuse, human rights and indigenous rights violations. They had partnerships with some of the main media outlets. And they organized hundreds of events. For the first time, we had AgriZone. So you have blue zone and green zone at climate negotiations, but AgriZone was a special area hosted by Embrapa, which is the Brazilian environment research agency that actually hosted this zone with hundreds of events. And that was really, we went there and there was a lot of kind of mention of how the industry is super efficient. It is, producing a lot of things in a really good way, and methane was mentioned just once, but basically kind of around basically breeding low methane cows. Next slide. Next slide is my last slide, but I wanted to show you some of the main messages actually. So the World Meat Congress. The call to action was not for the powerful industries to invest in mitigation and address the impact on climate change, but perfect your messaging, tell your story, and control the narrative. And at COP30, it was all about consumers are continuing to choose animal products, and it's meat industry responsibility to produce this as sustainably as possible with as little impact as possible. So this was kind of very focused on individual projects that are potentially reducing emissions, but then ignoring the fact that the overall emissions are going up. And I had the third one also, and the third one was basically around UK, where they actually had this briefing from insiders. So Insider Track, these are people that work in the industry and are actually anonymously wrote what the industry is doing, and they say there are many who seek to frame any conversation connected to meat and dairy reduction as an attack on choice, an attack on health, and an attack on farmers. This frame is being used to make serious conversations about the issue untenable. So what can we do? Next slide. We've been doing, so our work on this has been covered quite a lot by the media. So I would say that it's really important to call out these industry narratives, to call out the tactics and actually explain that this is not about farmers. It's about really, really powerful industry that has this interest to keep status quo going for as long as possible. And I'll hand back to Laura. Thank you.
That's great, Nusha. Thank you so much and perfectly on time. So Nusha brought us the context, the findings, and what we could do about this. I'm sure, Nusha, there would be questions for you when we get to that point, so do hang around there. And I see already that people are dropping questions into the Q&A, which is fantastic. We're just going to take another 30 seconds or so for people to be able to do that. And if you don't have any questions and you don't have any observations to add, you could just take a little breath and relax. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Another 20 seconds. Also gives me a chance to check the chat. Okay, great. So, just in case anyone joined a little later, I just want to say again that we're next going to hear from Zach Boren, who is a freelance investigative reporter and has done quite a lot of work on Big Ag's lobbying tactics and influence. So over to you, Zach.
Hi, thanks, Laura and Nusa. I had a presentation. I'm not sure. Maybe I can share screen, or does Maddie or Caitlin or someone like that have my thing? Otherwise, I'll just talk.
We'll get that set up, maybe,
Yeah,
Zach, while you
appreciate
go
it. So I'll
ahead.
just
Right.
quickly introduce myself. Yeah, no, as Laura mentioned, I'm an investigative journalist. I spent the last 10 years with Greenpeace Unearthed. And I've been covering food systems for the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years, with the New York Times, with the BBC, with the Financial Times, and the Guardian. So like lots of people, and I'm proud of my record, and I'm obviously going to highlight something that I've done in my very brief presentation. I think that's the last slide, if you don't mind. Yeah. There we go. So yeah, I just to get started, I wanted to start in 1989 when the world was just first coming to understand climate change and man-made climate change. Um, the academics Jennifer Jacquet and Viveka Morris, very good academics, they dug up last year a strategy document from the National Cattlemen's Association that showed that the meat industry was very ahead of the time. Like they figured out that climate action threatened consumption, they threatened their industry, and they knew of methane's warming capabilities. So I would recommend that people go find this document. It's incredibly informative. It's from 1989, but it lays out a strategy and a playbook that they've been using for the last almost 40 years, and it still shows up today. So next slide. Yeah, so a very good illustration of that playbook is a piece of work that I did with the New York Times about 5 years ago about Dr. Frank Mitloehner, otherwise known as the greenhouse gas guru. He's an academic at UC Davis. Probably a bunch of you guys know him. Some of you may not, but again, go check it out. He basically was one of the most influential academics in sort of the animal agriculture space, often obfuscating the impacts of the industry, and was, particularly impactful in rebutting some major reports that were produced, that like the Food and Agriculture Organization's Livestock Long Shadow report in the mid 2000s, and obviously the Eat Lancet report in 2019. So he had posited that he is like an independent academic, but I, in the New York Times, discovered that he received many millions from the livestock industry and was coordinating with them on messaging, on some strategies and priorities, taking down alternative proteins and promoting favorable policies like GWP Star, which is something that Changing Markets has done a lot of reporting on as well. This is just a good illustration of the strategy laid out in the NCA document, which was sort of rely on industry-funded scientists. So I mean, it's all right there, and you'll see anything that you kind of spot and you go, that's hinky, you might be able to trace it back to the NCA document, 1989. Next slide. And before, final slide, basically the latest Changing Markets report talks about the World Meat Congress that Nusa alluded to, which was in Brazil. And one of the presenters was this PR consultant. And she gave a really interesting talk, I thought, where she described a new iceberg heading for the meat industry, and that was ChatGPT, who will be the dietary advisor of the future. How the meat and dairy industry have dominated social media over the last few years with the protein craze. They are now aware that there's a new horizon, and that is artificial intelligence, chatbots, Claude and Grok and ChatGPT. And these AI chatbots get most of their information from, peer-reviewed science, government dietary guidelines, and pretty credible outlets like the BBC. As you can see in this article from Wired, RFK tried to instrumentalize Grok, Elon Musk's AI, but Grok referred to the science and would often give advice that did not align with what RFK's dietary guidelines suggested. So this PR consultant gave this presentation and basically said this is a big problem. If you're a middle-aged man and you go into ChatGPT and you say, what's a healthy diet for me? Yeah, sure, there might be some chicken in there, there might be some fish in there, but there'll be plenty of beans and pulses and very little, if any, red meat. And so this is a big issue facing the industry, and I think a pretty important frontier in the next sort of like information warfare around food systems and diet. And so I just wanted to throw that out there because I think it's not something that's been properly appreciated yet, and it might spark some interesting conversations. That's me.
That's great, Zach. I also suspect that this might generate some interesting conversations. I was not aware of the 1989 strategy document from the NCA. So thank you for bringing all of this. Let's once again take a minute to slow it all down and just see, right, is there anything in what Zach has said that you might want to comment on or ask a question on? And just take a moment to allow that to percolate, and then we'll move on in just a moment to Charlotte. Okay, wonderful. So, Charlotte, whenever you're ready, over to you.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's just see if it works. Oh, goodness. Saying I need to grant access. Let me just try. Sorry for the delay. Let me see now if it will work. Here we go. I think it should work now. Do you see?
Yes.
You do? Perfect. Okay, excellent. I just have to get back to the beginning. So thank you so much for having me. I am Charlotte Scaddan. I'm Senior Advisor on Information Integrity at the UN. And I'm going to talk today, perhaps a little more broadly, zoom out a bit about some of our work around climate information integrity, which is our approach to everything that's happening in the information ecosystem related to climate, and actually more broadly, pretty much all of the UN's goals and objectives and work. So I just wanted to draw your attention to one important, or a couple of important elements in the first ever UN Global Risk Report, which was released last July. And this was actually the combination of years of work with consultations with experts from around the world. This risk report identified what we term information risks or information integrity risks, such as mis and disinformation, as a top global vulnerability. And it was one that was unfolding rapidly, and a vulnerability for which the international community was insufficiently prepared to address. This risk was followed very closely by environmental risks, including climate change. So this kind of, I think for us, encapsulates what we see as two of humanity's greatest challenges converging. You've got the erosion of our information ecosystem in many ways, which I'll come to, and then we obviously have the climate crisis. And that for us is why we have this very big focus on climate information integrity specifically. So we think about not just climate disinformation or misinformation, we think about the range of risks in the information ecosystem that can undermine information integrity, can undermine climate action. And that includes, of course, disinformation campaigns, but it's also, includes harassment, hate speech, targeting of advocates and scientists, especially women, the malicious use of AI, and it was very interesting actually just to hear then about some of the issues around some of the AI chats. That's something we're monitoring very closely, and of course the monetizing of these different information risks. This is all very tied to what we see as inadequate trust and safety measures in tech, and of course now around AI, very few guardrails. But then also we very much look at disruption risks or access risks as we think about them. The decline of independent journalism, attacks on press freedom, in this case, the undermining of support for environmental journalism and those covering climate, but also more broadly, the algorithmic biases and limiting of people's information sources and digital divide. So these are all things that we're taking into account when we look at this space. Now, we've heard a bit already about some of the specific tactics around COP, and it's really interesting to hear actually, related to the food space. For us, we kind of think, and these are just some very top line broad tactics that we've identified in some of our own research, bearing in mind that we're obviously taking a global approach here. So we've looked at a few different regions, and we're also working with many civil society and academic partners to try and understand, what's happening. I think in terms of actors, we're pretty clear on the range of actors involved in efforts to undermine climate information integrity. Of course, first and foremost, the fossil fuel industry, but other industries too, political actors. And then, of course, we have the kind of more opportunist actors, those using climate as a wedge issue for completely different purposes other than undermining climate action, and also to make money. But some of the tactics that we've seen that are common actually across several countries and regions are, of course, discrediting the consensus on climate science, really framing anything related to climate action as ideologically and politically motivated, targeting climate scientists, advocates, journalists, and other information defenders, as I already mentioned, skewing the perception of policy and decision makers. So this is something we're really focused on now. We see that group really very heavily targeted, including with, ad campaigns, to try and make them think that there's public opposition to climate action when in fact there isn't. positioning and elevating what we call pseudo experts, climate scientists in quotes, who really aren't experts at all, but they're really positioned as trusted voices who are sticking up for ordinary people, and their supposed evidence is what we think of it as going through a process of information laundering, right? So it starts out on maybe a smaller account in the digital space, or with a smaller voice, and then it goes through several layers online and elsewhere before it's shared by a world leader or another credible, trusted voice, and that lends credibility to these experts. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of them. Exploiting social divisions and grievances to create backlash against a range of climate policies, and this is common in many, many countries. And I should just say that, often the tactic is to use what could be legitimate grievances, right? Socioeconomic grievances or political grievances, but really using them and then injecting some of the climate disinformation to really create that polarization and really undermine social cohesion. And then, of course, there's the more classic promoting conspiracy theories that link climate policies to control by global elites, and that, of course, includes the UN, as well as various governments. So what are we doing about all this? Well, our response is really multifaceted and broad. But the thing that I'm going to talk about today is our Global Initiative for Information Integrity on Climate Change. This was launched with the government of Brazil, us at the UN and UNESCO as co-chairs back in 2024 on the margins of the G20. This is our theory of change. It's very broad. I won't go into the whole thing, but it's really taking a multi-stakeholder coalition, building that up, and you'll see that's researchers, civil society, governments, and others to, support strategic communications, advocacy, journalism, and research to get the insights we need to make evidence-based, reliable information available and, empower the public and decision makers. We have three strategic pillars. They are, as I already mentioned, to strengthen research globally, and that includes expanding our understanding beyond the few countries where, to be honest, research investment has been concentrated and outside of the English language. Support evidence-based actions and solutions. That could be stratcoms, advocacy, journalism. Find out what's working and how it can be translated or scaled up, scaled out to other geographic settings. And then also integrate information integrity into international climate governance, including, of course, the COP process. We're doing this partly by a global fund that we've established. We received proposals from about 500 projects. We were expecting 100. So that really shows you the kind of depth of needs in this space from 93 countries. We're still fundraising. We do have contributions mainly from the government of Brazil so far, but we're hoping to get more from our member countries. And we've funded so far the first 10 projects. They're ongoing, and hopefully we'll have some good results to share soon. And just before I wrap up, I wanted to talk about some of what we've achieved in terms of the COP process. So first of all, information integrity was included as an action agenda item for the first time ever for COP30. We launched the Declaration for Information Integrity on Climate Change, which lays out a series of commitments for governments, but also aimed at other stakeholders. That now has 25 signatories and is growing. So we were really impressed with the reception to that declaration. At COP, it was so fascinating to me to see just the scale and volume of activity around information integrity from civil society, from several governments, from other parts of the UN system, from partners everywhere. And it was really, coming at the issue from many different entry points. It was extremely encouraging to me because we are obviously facing a massive challenge, as has already been outlined. Billion-dollar funded, campaign to undermine climate action in information spaces. And that can sometimes feel completely overwhelming. But I do think at COP, we saw this momentum. We've really tapped into this, I think, since launching this initiative. And I'll end by just saying that, we also managed, our goal really for COP was to get information integrity into the political outcome, which we did. And again, that was really a multi-stakeholder effort and coalition process. this is what we've got coming up this year. I'm out of time already, but just to flag it so you can see, we have so much planned. I'm happy to share more about our plans with any of you and see if there's ways that you can intersect. But we're still very focused on the COP process. That has not ended. We're looking at various different ways that we can engage different stakeholders and map what's happening globally. And of course, hopefully fund some more projects this year. So I'll end there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Charlotte. And you're well within the time, so that's great. Yeah, I guess I'd never really thought about misinformation and disinformation as top global vulnerabilities. I mean, they clearly are, but I just never really thought of it framed in that way. So thank you. I mean, I feel like these presentations are super complimentary. And we have one more in just a moment. But again, I'm going to ask you to just relax for a moment and maybe gather your thoughts. Charlotte there gave you an idea of maybe you want to pose some questions on what's coming up for them next or something else. I see there's a very healthy number of questions in the Q&A. So maybe just give yourself a moment to collect your thoughts and your questions, and then we will move on. Great. I met somebody last week who was absolutely horrified of my methods of bringing silence into meetings. So I hope too many people aren't horrified by what I'm doing just now. But I appreciate you joining in on that. So our last speaker is Thais Lazzeri. Thais, very happy to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning from Brazil. Nice to meet you all. My name is Thais Lazzeri. I'm the director and founder of FALA, a Brazilian impact studio that drives social change through communication, storytelling, and strategy. And one of our programs is called Mentira Tem Preço, or Lies Have a Price in Portuguese, showing the high cost of climate information in Brazil and worldwide. Thank you for sharing and have this space. So I love the idea of bringing climate to our lives. So I'd like you to ask everyone to imagine, open your phone just right now and read three things on the same day. That eating meat is essential to save the planet, that methane from cattle does not contribute to global warming, and that anyone who criticizes agribusiness wants to destroy Brazil economy. It sounds like a debate, but maybe it's something else. And that's the line. When the food becomes a narrative, truth becomes a battleground. So food is one of the most intimate parts of our lives. It involves health, culture, identity, traditions, survival. So when the public debate talks about food, it doesn't mobilize only data. It mobilizes deep emotions, and where there is emotion, there's also an opportunity for manipulation. And what we've been understanding and going deep in so far at FALA is try to understand the multiple layers on climate information about food. So it appears in layers, just as Charlotte said, and it repeats patterns, just as Nusa shared with us. It at the end, it serves very concrete with a very concrete purpose to delay government change, to block regulations, to question international agreements, and to prevent transformations in product chains. That's why I've been calling it as a new kind of supply chain of our era, the supply chain of lies. And that's why I created some years ago the program on integrity information called Lies Have a Price. And last year, the Integrity Information Observatory. Because in reality, we are not only monitoring lies, we are monitoring attempts to block the future. And what we learned so far is no one can solve a problem they cannot see. So let's go deep inside the Brazil scenario. In Brazil, this debate is particularly sensitive because the country is both a global agriculture powerhouse and one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases linked to land use. So this is where we are. This tension creates the perfect environment for narrative wars. And when information becomes fragmented, democracy becomes fragile. At the observatory, we started revealing the information about food follows very clear patterns, and it usually appears in three main forms. So you have the scientific denial, like cattle methane is neutral. But when you look at the data, reality becomes clear, just that Changing Markets Foundation just shared with us at the beginning of the COP30. They launched a global monitoring tool called the Methane Action Tracker. So this is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of science. These narratives are not neutral. They delay decisions about productive transition. Then you have attacks on solution and the ones that can bring solution. This is really a common narrative, not just in Brazil, but worldwide, trying to show that the environmental policies are anti-development or transform food systems threatens farmers. So this creates a false choice, either climate or economy. And when reality, when in reality, the challenge is transforming the production system. And then, but not the least, we have the culture war. It's another layer when science becomes opinion and solutions become a kind of conspiracy. So when food becomes a culture war, solutions appear. And that's definitely what all this climate industry, this climate supply chain wants. So we have here a crucial point for us. When you're talking about agribusiness, and it could be in Brazil or worldwide, we cannot speak in blocks because there is no single agribusiness. There is an agribusiness expanding through illegal frontiers and agribusiness investing in sustainability and productivity. So who are the ones, the actors that want to block the transition and why? And for us, and I've been working, and I work at 15 years as an investigative journalist. This is really, really key because every generalization can create a noise if it's not true. And noise is exactly when disinformation thrives. Our role here is not to say this is a bad or good sector. Our role is to make the system visible and find the solutions. So when we analyze the system more closely, we see three engineers. So we have the fundings, the power economic sectors with a lot of loss from changing in food systems. Their goal is not to convince everyone, is to create noise enough to delay the decisions. So I've been saying that doubt is the cheapest climate policy in the world. The second one is who produce the narratives. We can talk about PR campaigns, self-appointed experts, influencers, consultants. They transform propaganda into opinion, isolated science or scientific debate. The strategy is not new yet. We see the same thing happening in other areas on the climate information. But we have here something like the tobacco industry work, just the tobacco industry work like it. So later we had the fossil fuel companies doing the same thing. And now we have the food system in the same debate, repeating the same thing. And last but not least, we have the who amplifies. So this is the layer that we need. So this lie can spread faster and faster than truth. And we need to talk about the platforms where the false stories is spread 6 times faster than verified facts. So that creates a paradox. Disinformation and misinformation is scale because it was designed to scale. And what we can do now, so we need to build information integrity infrastructure, just as Charlotte was sharing with us. It's not about reaction, it's about building a new kind of architecture to find the solutions. And this is part of our work here. And in recent years, this agenda has moved beyond Brazil. Just as Charlotte mentioned, the global initiative, Brazil launched with UNESCO and United Nations, and we have more than 20 countries already joined. And there is a change also because we need to understand what are the talks and the information and the infrastructures working on the global south. And why? Because when you're talking about food, generally, you're talking about land rights in Brazil. And so this is so key to find the solution and bring the actors into the conversation, the companies. And that's why I believe this conversation must expand. We need more researchers, more country join, more civil society engaging, and more investment in integrity formation infrastructure. Because without this, the transition is going to be really, really, really slow. And the end, the question for me is, it's not about what we are eating, but what is information system sustain the way we produce food. And without the information integrity, the policies are going really, really small. The international agreements are going to be questioned and real solutions remain frozen. But we make the system visible. We will also make it transformation possible. And that's, I think, it's the next step for us, bringing together a new kind of infrastructure of information integrity. And I'm just going to share with you this dossier we shared during COP30 with all the acknowledgement we gained in all these years looking for climate integrity information in Brazil and worldwide. We need to talk about food. We need to talk about agribusiness. I invite you to get to know it on our website. And yeah, I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity of sharing everything we learned so far. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Thais. And yeah, I mean, I think you really put down very clearly all the layers that we're dealing with. It's interesting to hear you talking about all of the delays and all the doubt that is being sown and the contribution of that to just a destruction of the potential for transformation, and ending on a positive note there with, yeah, the importance of this infrastructure for information integrity. Super. So listen, as with the other speakers, let's just give everyone a moment to sort of let the sand gather at the bottom of the ocean floor and see how we're coming out in terms of questions. And I will also just take a quick look. I'm seeing there are 16 questions, and we're going to do our best to get through as many as we can in just a moment. Very good. Yeah, that looks like a healthy number. So if it's all right, folks, what I'd really like to do, there's a question in here that could be asked to any of and all of the panelists potentially. Let's start with this one, that the playbook that Zach described, isn't surprising, nor is its origin in the late 20th century. What is surprising is that it hasn't changed or evolved. But has it? It sort of feels like, they repeat the same playbook over and over, and we haven't found a way to stop that. Do you, as the panel, have any insights or tips on how to look at fighting their fake facts with the truth, or any specific insights on what might have changed? Shall we start with you, Nusa? As you're the...
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think the reason why this playbook is so effective is because it still kind of flies under the radar. I think a lot of people don't really know that this is a playbook, and they actually believe the messenger. And the industry is very good at knowing like who should convey those messages. And very often the public doesn't really understand that the messenger has some kind of ulterior motive or is speaking on behalf of people that, are there to protect the status quo. And we did a lot of work on the meat and dairy industry. We have published this gigantic report, The New Merchants of Doubt, that looks at the industry tactics to delay, distract, and derail climate action. And you can really kind of see those tactics described in detail. And they go from greenwashing, from voluntary actions, to focus on techno fixes, to the fact that they do very, very hardcore lobbying as soon as any kind of policies are proposed, to the fact that they kind of instrumentalize farmers' protests that may start for different legitimate reasons, but the farming associations that often represent the biggest and the richest farmers use this protest to get highest political level meetings, and then axe green policies that they find undesirable. So I'll just park it here, but I'll drop a link to, or one of my team will drop a link to the New Merchants of Doubt, where we go into this much more in detail.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Would anyone else on the panel like to jump in on this question? If not, there are plenty of others.
I put my hand up. Sorry, I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry, Charlotte. It just popped up the second.
Okay.
Go for it.
No, just to add to that, I think it's a really good question, actually, because it's true that many of the tactics, and I'm speaking more broadly about climate disinfo actors, haven't changed. What has changed is the tools with which they can carry them out, right? So, that's what's changed in the digital space in the last, 20 years or so. And now with other emerging tech and AI, I think that even in terms of the narratives, and this is kind of what I was trying to get at a little bit, we see commonalities there too. The way across so many different geographic spaces, the way that those narratives and those tactics are executed might differ a bit, right? Depending on the geographic setting or the audience. But it's absolutely true that there are these commonalities, and there is a playbook. And that is in a way an advantage to us, right? Because we know what the playbook is roughly. I mean, we still need to investigate it more. We still need to research it more. But there are general trends that we know. We know when these tactics are going to spike, for instance. So I think, and by the way, this actually cuts across, like, it's the same tactics, not just around, food and climate, not just around climate, but around so many of the different issues we work on. So the point is that because we know this, we should be able to use that to our advantage in how we strategize and how we can get ahead of it in terms of prevention and protection measures, in terms of mitigation measures in the moment, and then in terms of recovery. So I put in the chat, hopefully it can be shared with everyone, one of our issue briefs where there's an implementation guide section at the end, which really breaks down actually many of the response measures that are based on these tactics. So I think that we know more than perhaps we as an information integrity community think we might do. And so I think we need to use that so we can be better prepared.
Great, thank you very much. I wonder, would any of the others like to come in, maybe have a different thing to say or to add onto that, this question?
I'm really sorry, could I just add one more thing that I forgot to say that's really
Sure.
important, which is
Yes.
that the one thing we have to bear in mind is resources. So we're up against, adversarial actors who are extremely well funded. I mean, we all know, right, what we're dealing with there. We are, for the most part, not well funded, especially now. So that is something that we do have to be realistic about. And so I think all of the measures that we put forward are really aimed at those who are, potentially resource challenged. But that is something we have to be clear-eyed about, I think.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that. Thais.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to share something that really resonates with Charlotte was mentioned. It's about sustain the conversation. So this is not a new conversation. We have this for long years. We have now platforms, and now you have more people talking about and sharing these lies. The point is, what is the other side doing? In the Democratic camp, we have some key areas to develop. One of these is, for us, it's really difficult to sustain conversations. We move you know, and we enter the conversations in the end of the game sometimes. So the idea of transformation is not going to be quick. You need, of course, you need to work in coalitions, but you need efforts, you need people, you need funding for that. You need to understand deeply the scenario in order to find the solution for every part of the system, because the way people communicate and get information changed. Does the communication change with it, or we are trying the same models and repeating something that's not going to talk with these people? Because at end, story and what we believe is something that someone told you. We believe in things that someone told us, but now we have more people telling us, and these people get the credit as a scientist, for example. So we need to understand the ways people understand communication in order to, find solutions for that. And this is the piece when I'm talking with society, but in other layers, we need to understand also that people inside governments, they are impacted by disinformation, So everyone, we need allies in every room now on.
You're making me think of Zach's greenhouse gas guru just now. I wonder, Zach, do you want to add anything on this one?
In terms of whether or not the playbook has changed?
Yes.
It is a good question. And I agree absolutely with what Charlotte's saying is that, I mean, the ecosystem in which they're operating has changed, but the playbook it's not just being used by the meat and dairy industries, it's used by any number of polluting industries. And that is because it works, because it is distracting, because it is confusing. I would also just point out that the meat industry has been so successful at sort of communication and ensuring a positive regulatory environment for themselves because they have incredible horizon scanning. And this is the thing about that NCA report in 1989. I don't think anyone who, when they first were learning about global warming, was thinking, oh, well, means that people are going to eat less meat. They were just sort of wrapping their head around this thing. But the National Cattlemen's Association was coming up with a detailed and effective plan on how to make sure that that didn't happen. And that is the case for a lot of flare-ups where suddenly diet becomes a hot issue, becomes a health issue, becomes an environmental issue, becomes an economic issue. They are wargaming constantly. They are figuring out how best to respond to things before they happen. And so, I mean, in some ways you kind of have to take your hat off to it, but it really is. I think that is a part of the playbook that is incredibly hard to internalize because it requires you to be thinking constantly about potential threats. And yeah, I'm not really sure what the lesson is here, but I just think that that's an important piece of information about the industry.
Definitely. And I wonder how that horizon scanning, how easy that is today versus 1989. It's a little bit of a different context. We're going to move on to another question. There's two here that are linked for sure. One is, how do we stop AI getting co-opted by the meat and dairy industry by feeding it information that is wrong in future? And a similar one is, or at least it's still related to AI, given the growing volume of industry-funded research in the benefits of meat for both human and planetary health and its growing influence on US and other national dietary guidelines and policy, how confident can we be that AI tools like ChatGPT will continue to reflect balanced evidence-based consensus rather than amplifying any underlying bias in the research landscapes? So I'm wondering, Charlotte, just from a general sort of information integrity perspective, if this is something you'd be up for.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we can't be sure of anything when it comes to the AI tools. And I think that's one of our biggest concerns. I mean, there are efforts, I should say, at the UN level to look at some of these risks and to have kind of, safe and ethical and reliable AI, including the new global dialogue on AI governance that's happening in July, and various panels that have been put forward. But I think, you know, there is a growing concern around this. Now, obviously, I think advocacy is really important here. We're not seeing the regulatory guardrails around AI that are, you know, going to, I think, move at the speed that we would need, especially in certain countries. And I think it's really important that the alarm is raised on this issue more broadly around how reliable these tools are, because what we are seeing is that there is this really worrying trend that people are increasingly skeptical and increasingly don't know what is real, what to believe and what isn't. So when people lose trust in any information source, that includes potentially reliable information sources, and it makes our job that much harder. So I think the AI literacy piece and the public awareness around these tools is absolutely urgent. That's something that we are working on. I think that the again, you know, there is public concern around this, so tapping into that. Then, of course, looking strategically at how we can make that reliable information available. I mean, we know that these tools are calling on platforms like Wikipedia, for instance, right? So how can we ensure that those platforms have accurate and reliable information is something we're working on around on a range of UN issues. We need to support media coverage, reliable media coverage, public interest media that, again, we know will feed some of these LLMs. So I think that there's kind of there's different approaches. There's the kind of you know, pushing the reliable information out there, but then also doing all we can to ensure that those guardrails are there. But no, we can't continue. No, we can't be sure about it, and it's something that I think we all need to be focusing on.
Great, thank you very much. Going to go to another question here, which is for Zach. So it's from Charlotte from Eating Better. Zach, do you think the increase in health advice coming from AI bots will lead to even more academic research being funded by the industry? And if so, what can we do to mitigate?
So yes, that's a great question, and I think kind of totally on the money, to be honest. So just to quickly answer the questions a bit that Charlotte just answered about AI, sort of the integrity around that, and I just thought I'd throw this out there because it's a friend of mine who writes for the BBC, and he did an article the other day about so he decided to try and influence AI. So he wrote a blog about how he is the best journalist at eating hot dogs. Which is obviously something that no one's ever written about. Who's the best journalist at eating hot dogs? And now if you ask sort of chatbots, who's the best journalist at eating hot dogs, it has you know, regurgitated the information it has consumed in there. So I do think that that the artificial intelligence can be gamed. Fortunately, I think that for major dietary recommendations, they tend to use, at this stage at least, and who knows where things are going to go, they tend to use good science, peer-reviewed science for the most part. I do think that the US dietary guidelines reversing the pyramid will have had an impact because it's bound to. But I think at this moment, the peer-reviewed process cannot be downplayed. It is an incredibly important thing we have about quality of science, and a lot of, like, for instance, the Clear Center and Dr. Frank Mitloehner, much of the material that they produced was not peer reviewed. There was maybe a couple here and there, but for the most part, it was like more white paper briefings, etc. And so I think that process is sacrosanct, really. In terms of whether or not the industry is going to fund more favorable research, I mean, I think they've been doing it for a long time, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're ramping up. There was a terrific paper in let me just get this up, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition last year, where they analyzed nutritional and health studies, industry funded versus sort of independent funding, like academic funding, and the outcomes were kind of wildly different. The industry funding was, I think, 2/3 more likely to produce a favorable outcome for sort of eating meat products or anything like that. So it's obviously advantageous. And you want to have scientists like these ones at the American Journal of Nutrition doing these meta-analysis to kind of point out that this research is maybe not as reliable as you'd want. So I don't have a real answer for what you do about it. I just sort of observing that this is the next this is the battleground for information warfare going forward. So it's just sort of one to be thinking about a lot.
Thank you. Indeed, that awareness is important. Nusa, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have an answer either, but I would just like to throw into the debate that I've seen a BBC news piece of some academics that actually set up an AI chat box that was actually convincing people to snap out of beliefs into conspiracy theories and misinformation. And apparently that worked better than other humans. So there is potentially also a tool that we could use to actually address some of the misinformation, especially conspiracy theories. But whether or not this is going to happen, I think it's a different question because let's face it, the ones that have the resources are probably going to use them to influence the way AI processes such information also.
Great. Thank you very much, Nusha. I'm conscious of spreading out the questions a bit, and I wonder maybe for Thais, Thais, you can come to any question you want, but I see one in particular here that I'm curious to get to and hear your opinion on. It's this piece, and anyone might have a view on it. Could you speak to the different narratives used in high-income countries versus low and middle-income countries on animal protein? I suspect any of you may have insights on this. So, Thais, if that's not your one, please feel free to pick up one where you think this is for me.
No, actually, we have the same conversations in a global scenario in Brazil, but it depends what the industry wants. The industry of the supply chain of lice. I can talk a little bit more about Brazil. Of course, we have some talks about eating that kind of protein or not eating that, but actually, the efforts are on keeping the land. So this is the target in Brazil. This is really, really key to understand because here in the Global South, we have lands. So that's why the conversation keeps on the different way. But actually, we have monitoring some lies and some disinformation and misinformation about the proteins. But definitely, this is not something that happens a lot here in Brazil.
Got it. I wonder, does anyone else want to jump in on that point? Or shall I move it on? Looking around, okay.
I mean,
Nusha?
I would just say that in the Global South, it's very much about food security and the need to grow animal protein consumption because that is, dealing with all the micronutrient deficiency and people not consuming enough protein and stuff like that. And in the Global North, it's all about it's essential part of the healthy diet and meat is natural and it's good for you and things like that. But often, yeah, we're over consuming meat in the global north, and this is something the industry never wants to talk about. And also, what they're talking about a lot is like how efficient they are, how they've already achieved so much. They have a positive story to tell. And if you actually reduce production in the global north, you're going to have more production in the global south, and this will increase emissions.
Thank you for that, Nusha. I wonder while you're there, there's a specific question here. Please speak to the false metrics used to justify regenerative grazing. How should they best be countered? Is that something you could say something on?
Yes, absolutely. So this is really, this is kind of coming from this basically Alan Savory TED Talk and Kiss the Ground documentary that we've noticed has been very much used in various online narratives, but it's kind of how cows are essentially capturing carbon in the soils. And when you have independent researchers looking into this, they realize that this is not true. They're saying that in order to offset methane emissions from the animals that we're producing now, you would need to capture as much carbon as all the agriculture emitted since pre-industrial ages. So this is kind of the false narrative that is there, right? I'm going to try to find the data and just copy it in the chat because it's really quite crazy, the numbers.
Wow, thank you very much for that. And I see Thais also has her hand up. Perhaps it's on this one.
Yeah, just mentioning something that I think is really important for this. When you're talking about agribusiness, one of the key things is that if you change the system, this is one of the lives, there's no food for everyone, especially in for Brazilians. So, oh, it's going to be food. When you look at the data, you see that you actually the small farmers are the ones that produce most of the food that we eat in our everyday lives. So this is something like really key to understand. One of the the biggest lies they are telling on food insecurity in the global south.
Yeah, okay. Wow. Yeah, that one's still coming. I wonder, maybe just one more specific question, and then I would like to give each of you just a last round and to pick a question that you think you would still like to reflect on before we close up. But I wonder, somebody has pointed out here, how can we build on the work that Charlotte outlined to ensure food culture wars and misinformation are tackled as climate misinformation? Would anyone like to come to that point? Charlotte, maybe you, what's coming, your last slide.
And maybe I can also combine this with my final comment, which actually they're actually linked, which I think is we've really tried to broaden the group of stakeholders that we work with around information integrity and around climate information integrity. So I think, I spend a lot of time, I go around the world, speak at a lot of events on a lot of different issues related to info integrity. And one of the things that I feel quite passionate about is that we really need to connect all of these different pockets of work, the pockets of research, the pockets of strategic action, because we have so much to learn from each other and so much to share. So I think it's really important that we don't just speak to ourselves, right? And that, we make sure that we bring in all of these different strands. As we mentioned earlier, a lot of the tactics from these different adversarial actors are similar. A lot of the responses are similar. So let's use that, let's share our learnings and our informational resources. And one thing I do just want to stress, this can be my final point, I guess, is, in expanding those stakeholders, we have really looked to the monetization of disinformation and hate online and how we can address that, given that the big tech platforms, which really are advertising companies, right? That's what they are not going to self-regulate and, have made their position on trust and safety very clear. So, we are working with advertisers, with brands in the ad industry to try and raise awareness with them about the fact that, they are the ones funding these platforms, right? It's their ad dollars that end up funding a lot of the disinformation and hate we see, not just on social, but on across online spaces. So we've really been engaging with them and we're getting a lot of traction. We have a new paper coming out on that actually in the next few weeks, which I'm happy to share when it arrives. But that is really, I think, an entry point for change because advertisers don't want to see they have brand risk in mind. They don't want to see their ads near disinformation, but they also, don't want to be wasting their money, right? That are going to slot websites, etc. So we have a business case. And I think I mentioned this partly because, we do have to address the business model of big tech and what's happening. But also, I think it's that expanding who we're bringing in and who we're speaking to and expanding those coalitions around this. So I'd be happy to follow up with any of you on this, particular angle and share anything that we're doing. We are very open and welcoming to new partners and stakeholders in this space. And, we cannot do this alone. The UN is, certainly not in a position to do this alone. We have the support of our Secretary General, who feels very strongly about this issue, but we need all of you and we need those, we need those coalitions. So I'll just,
Thank you.
But please do follow up.
Thank you for that widen the tent positive message. Great. Zach, I'd love to come to you. The time is nearly up, but maybe you could just take a minute. Anything you would like to add? No pressure.
To be honest, I had thought about what I would say to close out, and it was
Great.
not a very positive thing. And so in some ways, I sort of think that Charlotte's note is a better one to end on than whatever I was going to say. So, yeah.
Now we're very curious about what you were going to say.
Nothing too interesting, just a bit bleak. But anyways, Charlotte's one about change making, I think that's not really my
Great,
game. So
great. Thank you very much for the hot dog eater article. Definitely be diving into that after this webinar. Thais, would you like to share some final remarks?
Well, I'm a believer. So I always believe that if we work collectively, we're going to achieve it. And so that for me, it's really key sustain the conversation, but also asking others to work with you, to share knowledge with you, and try to understand how together we can build solutions in the short and the long term. So this is something, but there is something that actually everyone here can do just right now. And the thing is, when someone is share with you something that she or he believes is true, and actually it's false or disinformation, misinformation, actually look at the eyes of this person and try to talk to her, talk to him, because one of the things that polarization do that really quick is divide us. So when we can listen to someone and call these people in is truly something magic that everyone here can do at home and at work or in other places, because building relationships and building trust is something that everyone can start doing just right now.
That's great. Thank you, Thais. And I think that's quite coherent to what Nusa was saying before. Nusa.
Yeah, no, just to say that I think this was highlighted a couple of times as a major global threat, especially short-term threat, misinformation and disinformation. And, we all felt we're like screaming in our own silos, but then now we have a UN initiative, which I think is great. And it shows the importance this issue is gaining. And I really hope that more governments join and more other organizations join, and that you add food systems also, because it's still not making it on the climate agenda, and we know more and more why. So maybe that's also an angle through which we can achieve a little bit more action on climate and food. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Nusha. And there's a lot that's come out here, this political outcome at the COP in terms of information integrity, the call for, a stronger infrastructure for information integrity, getting our AI literacy and awareness skills up, and perhaps playing tricks a little bit with it as well, here and there, calling people in, and particularly questioning the industry narratives and tactics. And yeah, I mean, some of the things you said made me want to break out in song. So I think there might be a potential for some interesting lyrics to be developed out of some of these stories. Folks, this has been wonderful, and there's a whole live debate going on in the chat. So I've never seen so much exchange of reports. So what you asked for, Charlotte, in terms of collecting the pockets of work and sharing the learning is actually just happening live here. Folks, there's an awful lot of invisible work that we need to make visible in terms of like just pulling together an hour and a quarter of this, and it really goes down to Maddie. And I wonder if Maddie could just turn on her camera for a second and give us a wave so we can acknowledge her and her role in writing the report with Nusha, and for all the work she did to make me feel like, great in turning up here, and all the speakers as well. So just massive work, well done. This really matters. So I hope you're proud of yourself today. Maddie, we talked about it before, sort of like what do you want to ask people to do? And she was saying, look, clearly we'd love you to share this report. Also, this stuff is all over LinkedIn and Changing Markets, various social media channels. So, if something comes to mind after, get involved in the conversation, drop a comment, ask a question. Not all the questions got answered. Very sorry about that, but you still could follow up there. And just keep on calling it in. And thank you for turning up for this. We hope you'll turn up to the next one again. And I'm seeing fabulous webinar again. Oh, stop. You're terrible. No, this was really, really fantastic. And just a big thanks to all of you. And have a lovely rest of the day from sunny Flanders. How did that happen? See you very soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well done.